Welcome to the Mission Minded podcast, where we dive deep into Scripture and ask ourselves what it means to live out the Great Commission. Let's jump into today's episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mission Minded podcast. I am joined today by Rachel and Dr. Tim Anstein. And if you've been following along, we have been covering a lot of information in Genesis, specifically having to do with creation, and lots of topics surrounding that. And today we wanted to move into what some people would call the fall, which happens after creation, or it can also be referred to as the three rebellions, and these stories are found later in Genesis, and so we wanted to cover them in succession to what we've been talking about. So I say we just jump in, and so Dr. Anstein, do you want to give us kind of a little bit of like contextual information of what we're going to be talking about today?
Sure, I would love to, and yeah, it's good to be back. I've missed this a lot, so it's fun to be back on camera. Hey, when we're dealing with the fall, I think one of the things that we really want to be aware of is that the Bible has this arc of a rebellion of our free will. So when God created humanity, he created us as little imagers of him, and part of the being imagers of Yahweh, the God of gods, the Lord of lords, we have what we call free will. So that means that we are outside of what I would call a confined um, cause and effect uh, universe, meaning this idea that everything is like determined or programmed because there's a closed universe. Humans and God Himself, and I'm going to argue this middle ground that we don't hardly ever talk about, the unseen world of these. I'm going to call them the Watchers, just because I think it's a safe term to use, other than Nephilim or angels or demons or whatever. Because there's so many languages we've got to get into. Because what happens in this whole idea of the fall, we need to realize what is falling is the fact that we as humans have free will, right? We have, and God knew this. He knew that we being less than him, even though being made in his likeness, where we have the ability to choose right from wrong, good from evil, we would choose poorly. We would choose to follow our own agenda over his. He knew that. That's not like, oh, whoa, look at these little creatures I made. They messed up. He knew this. This was part of the original plan, which is why the part of the original beauty of Jesus coming to restore it was also part of the whole narrative and the whole plan. So when we talk about the fall or these three rebellions, we need to realize that they're happening against God's perfect plan for the entire universe. And I'm going to argue that the universe is God's sanctuary. In fact, when you read Genesis 1 and 2, you get language that the universe is his sanctuary. So when he manifests himself from out there in his world to, or in his identity or his transcendentness to us, think of the universe as his temple, his place where he resides. You and I then being the pinnacle of that creation, because he would reside in us as beings that can contain his Shekinah, his glory. So when we have this ability to fall, this is what's going on in Genesis 3. The very first, and this is the classic one that happens within the church. The whole idea of Satan approaching Eve and saying, "Hey, did God really say?" And putting that temptation in her space, and she was like, "Wow, I could be like God." Notice he doesn't say God. You can't be a God. You can be a like God, meaning that you will know right from wrong. So that's the original, what we would call the original fall, the original rebellion. Now, there are two other rebellions that happen in Scripture. So and we talked about evil. We talked about the problem of evil in a previous podcast, so we don't really need to go back through that. But I want to link for us the rebellion in Genesis 3, the classic one in the church that we talk about as, the fall. This is what Paul is talking about in Romans 5:12, right? Through one man, sin, singular there, sin entered the world, and through that, death spread to all men. So that's what we would call the Adamic fall. And I don't know, Rachel, if you wanted to read Romans 5:12, that would be a good one for us to look at, because Paul
Yeah,
is,
I was just gonna flip there.
yeah, Paul is crystal clear. He is, and this is, again, this is where we get the whole language in the church of the Adamic fall, the Adamic nature being in Adam, from 1 Corinthians 15, if you will. But read Romans 5:12, because that's a good one for us to realize that's the link between Genesis 3 and what we call the New Testament fall.
So Romans 5:12 says, "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, like you said, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned." That's sorry, I totally read that terribly, but
Yeah.
that's what it says.
Yeah. So, and this is the link. It's crystal clear. There's no ambiguity there. It's the original fall that happens in Genesis 3 is directly linked to the fall of humanity. The problem that we're going to see is, growing up in the church, we never really were exposed to the other two rebellions. And in order to understand, and the reason why are you going into all this? Because in order for us to really understand the flood, we've got to understand there are actually two other rebellions that are, and the second rebellion is actually linked to the reason for the flood. So the first rebellion kicks God's family, Adam and Eve and his descendants, out of his garden. Okay, that's an important. So they were kicked out of the garden. All right. So then they wander and they still do their own thing, and then it gets really bad. Things get really, really bad. And so here's the second link. And again, this is going to be new to. I'll be honest with you. I know of two pastors that actually have even done the due diligence to study this, because I'm just going to encourage our listeners. This to me is like seeing the totality of the Old Testament, and it comes alive through the power of the New Testament. What Jesus is really doing on Caesarea Philippi, when he goes up to Mount Hermon, and we had transfiguration. All of that language is in direct response to what's going on in Genesis, and rarely is that link. So that's kind of cool for our listeners to be able to put that link together, because when we read Genesis, and what we're going to do here in a second is we're going to see the background story for the flood is Genesis 6:1 through 9, really. So we'll get to that, but notice there's some really difficult language in Genesis 6:1 through 4. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about with the second rebellion. What happens with Genesis 6:1 through 4, and the reason why this is so important as the background before we jump into the hydroplate theory, which I know you and Rachel, we're all kind of excited, because I'm excited for it. I love teaching it. But if we
Oh
don't
yeah, I
understand,
was like, it's time. We got to get
it's
into the
time, right? We
flood.
got to get to the flood. But if we don't understand the background story as to why the flood, then a lot of things get, well, was it local? And we get a lot of trivial questions that are actually addressed in the text if we let the text speak. And that's why, to me, that second rebellion is so important. Now, here's what I want to frame this with. The second rebellion, okay, with first rebellion is Genesis 3 linked to Romans 5:12. Just for fun, Rachel, look up Galatians 3:19. Just keep that at your ready, because I want our listeners to see the difference here, what Paul's doing. So Galatians 3:19 is what I'm going to refer to back. So what's going to happen here with the second rebellion in Genesis 6:1 through 4? This event, whatever's happening, it's one of the most difficult in all of Scripture. To be honest with you, it's weird. In fact, a lot of pastors at the pulpit shy away from it. They skip over it. They kind of are afraid to really jump into the exegesis of this. But the reason why this is so important is because it was whatever happened here, which I'll explain what's going on, or at least what we believe was going on. It's linked directly to 1 Peter 3:18 to 22. It's linked to 2 Peter 2:4 through 5, and it's linked to Jude 6:6 and 7. 6 and 7 is kind of fun. So with that whole idea of
Not
right,
you too, Dr. Einstein.
right, I know, right. I'm just like, all right, well, I just, for the record, right, chemists are the original 6-7, because I teach about carbon and nitrogen, which is element 6 and element 7, and I've been doing that for long
So
before 6-7 became.
You're like, it was cool before you
Right,
guys.
exactly. So with that, the first Peter reference, the second Peter reference, and the Jude reference, they are referring back. This is important. They are referring back to Genesis 6:1 through 4. Okay, so because this is such an important event in the timeline of reality, we have, and this is why to me it's frustrating that we haven't heard this growing up in the church, because again, it's weird, it's bizarre, it's something that we're not comfortable with. And here's the bias that I want our listeners to understand. The bias is going to come because we live in what's called a scientific age, when we're afraid of the supernatural, right? So
Yep.
those of us that grow up in the church think, well, wait a minute, we memorize scripture like Ephesians 6, the armor of God. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against rulers and powers and authorities and principalities of darkness. Well, we memorize that, but we're not comfortable with it, right? And we probably don't do due diligence to break down what Paul is really talking about. So wait a minute, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Okay, we don't wrestle against the carbon suits. We're wrestling against spiritual beings and authorities and
In the
rulers and
spiritual realm.
power in the spiritual realm. It's like, what? The spiritual realm? And so that's why, to me, if we have to peel away our scientific bias, right? Our if because we've talked about this quite a bit. My empiricism, right? I've got to be able to see it with my senses and study it for it to be real. Well, wait a minute. That's science. Science is not equipped to deal with the supernatural, right? It's a different category. So in logic, science is an awesome tool, but it only is relevant in the physical realm. If we're in the non-physical realm, science is
Yeah.
silent. It has nothing to say. It doesn't mean that the supernatural isn't there. It just means that science can't tell you anything about it. So we have to have another source to say what's outside of this idea of the physical world. And this is where we get into this whole unseen world. And that's what's going on with the second rebellion. Here's the cool thing about the original creation. The original creation had three levels of what we talked about ontology, many podcasts ago. Three levels of being. Okay? The highest level of being is the unseen world. It's the what we would call angels and demons, right? And here's a frustrating thing. Most pastors have only had maybe a chapter, if they're really lucky, maybe a book on the topic of demonology or angelology in seminary. So it's just not typically taught as the big aha that this whole unseen world really is. I would encourage our listeners, if they're interested in this, just before I jump in, there are two books that I think everyone should read. If you really want to do the deep dive, it's called The Unseen World by Michael Heiser. He's a PhD, high thinking, high view of scripture, just incredible scholar, biblical scholar. But his layperson book of the same topic is called Supernatural. Everyone should read it. It literally will change the way you view scripture in such an exciting way. That said,
I've been
when
wanting to read those.
oh my words,
I have them in my Amazon cart and I
oh, you
haven't
do.
actually bought them yet. I
Dude,
need to read them.
start with Supernatural. Supernatural is it's just it give, like I said, it's accessible. And unseen the unseen realm is the deep dive, and it's his PhD thesis, so it should be the deep dive, right? But with that,
So it's going to be a lot mentally
yeah,
to
it is,
to
and then
read through.
and then if you really want to geek out, his book called Reversing Herman is phenomenal. But anyway, all that to say, the second rebellion is the one we want to focus on, because the second rebellion is the one that sets up the flood. Okay, so first rebellion is going to be Genesis 3 linked to Romans 5 and 12. Now, the second rebellion, the one that Jude and Peter are referring to, is Genesis 6 1 through 4. This is an important thing that our listeners need to realize. When Paul is talking in Galatians 3, the language there is very different. So Rachel, I don't know if you have that. Read Galatians 3:19. See what Paul is saying there.
Okay, Galatians 3:19 says, "Why then the law? It was added because of transgressions, until the offspring should come to whom the promise had been made, and it was put in place through angels by an intermediary." And that's just verse 19. I can keep going if you want
Yeah,
me to, but that's
so
just
stop
verse
there.
19.
That's fine for now. Just to set up the notice what happens here. Paul's working from a different ideology there. He is working from. Notice he uses the word transgressions, right? He doesn't say in Romans 5. He said sin, singular. Sin entered out, well, because Adam and Eve chose poorly. Notice how this is different. This is a very different idea of the fall, right? He uses the word not sin but transgressions, plural. Okay, so What is he talking about? Well, here's what our listeners need to realize. He's saying that the law came in after the Abrahamic promise. Why? Notice the promise of Abraham was prior to what happened with the Ten Commandments, right? The law. The law came after Abraham, but the promise was between Abraham that would be his seed would lead to Jesus. Well, then why in the world, and this is what Paul's asking, why in the world the law? Why did we have the law stuck in the middle there? Well, do you guys know the Ten Commandments? What's the first commandment?
Honor
You
your father and
shall
mother.
you shall have no other.
Oh, God's before
God's
me.
before me.
Yes,
And I was like, I feel like I should know this, and I
I
don't have it
know.
as memorized
Yeah.
as I thought I did.
No, you're fine. And that wasn't a test. I was just like, right. Well, wait a minute. What's the very first commandment? You shall have no other gods before you.
Gods.
Yeah.
What? You shall have no other Elohim is the word there. What's that mean? Why is that the first commandment? I mean, does that mean? And here's how you can see this totally mistaught, misunderstood in the church. We make gods, and then the second commandment is idols, right? Don't no graven image. Well, wait a minute. Why no gods and then images? And well, don't make golf an idol. Don't make boats or your car an idol or your job an idol, and therefore that becomes a god. And we water down what's going on with the law. What's happening here is it's crystal clear that there are other beings out there who want us to pledge our allegiance to them, and Yahweh is coming in and saying, do not do that. I am the God of gods. There's only one Yahweh, but there's a realm of these other created beings. So back to our three levels of ontology, you have the watcher level, okay, which has, as Paul's talking about in Ephesians 6, again, you have rulers and powers. There's a whole hierarchy. We're not given complete revelation of what that looks like, but we're given enough language to know that there is a whole realm out there of these beings that watch over us. Okay, that's part of our reality. And if we want to be the geeky scientists, well, I don't agree with that. Go for it. You also don't have to believe in gravity, right? It's true because that's a part of our reality. And so you have this whole unseen realm. This ontological being set also has the stubbornness of free will. Now, that's very important for our listeners to realize that they have free will, we have free will. We're the second tier of creation. The third tier of creation is going to be the animal kingdom, right? So you have, ontologically, you have here goes back to our triune perfectum. You have a triad of being. You have the watcher level, the human level, and the animal level, or the angelic level, the human level, and the animal level. So this goes back to what we talked about before with the soul and the spirit and the body. We are unique. We are not angels. They have spirit and soul. Okay, they don't have body. We are body, soul, spirit. Animals are body, soul, right? They don't have spirit. They cannot accept the presence of God into their little being because that they weren't created part of that. Right? So you see the three levels here. So here's what's going on to set up the flood. That angelic realm also fell. We're not given exactly how that happened. And here's a myth that is perpetuated within the church, which kind of gets frustrated. But Revelation 12, where it talks about a third of the stars, and that gets equated to a third of the angels fell. That's not the right language there. That's the only place in the whole Bible that talks about the word a third. That whole section, if you actually study Revelation 12, is not dealing with the fall of the angels. It's actually physically talking about the timing of when Jesus would come to earth. It's talking about the birth of Jesus, not the fall of the angels. So I just want to say that I actually just heard a pastor on a sermon a couple of weeks ago down in Texas, and he's got a huge following, like 30,000 people in his congregation, which is awesome. He's phenomenal. But he talked about Revelation 12 being a third of the angels falling. Just know, and we can go into that if we want, but I don't know if our listeners even care. But that's not what John. That's not what John is talking about in Revelation 12. Just for the record, what's important for us then is we've linked the human fall to Genesis 3 and Romans, right? Okay, we've got that. That's what we know as the fall. That's what we know as of sin. What's happening, what we're going to see is the other beings that have free will. right? The created what and I want to be clear on this. Just all the listeners out there. The word Elohim is a word that we translate to God. Okay? So if if you want to do some back reading on this, if you want to spend some time, go and read Psalm 82. Psalm 82 should challenge you to the core of your belief in who God is and what's going on here. All right. So in context of the word Elohim, it is the word that we translate to God. The difficulty is that Elohim can be singular or plural. Does that make sense? You can have Elohim or Elohim. And it's like you can have dear or dear. You have to put it in context because the word itself is singular, but in context it can be singular or plural. It's just like English, the Hebrew is the same in that
Mm.
regard. So what's happening here is, and this is why you shall have no other gods. Shall have no other Elohim before you. There's only one Yahweh. But this watcher world that we're going to see here in Genesis 6 is the world of the Elohim. And again, it goes back to Psalm 82, describes this whole thing that's going on here. And so this idea of the second rebellion that happens in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, is the backstory of what's going on. Now, here's what I want to challenge our again, like I said, you're typically not going to get this from the pulpit because it's just weird. But somehow the unseen realm of the watchers, they can take on physical existence. Again, we know that because there were throughout the Old Testament, you'll see angels that manifest some form of a body and walk and talk and eat, and you see that all through the body. You see that in the New Testament. It's something that you're just like, oh, that's kind of weird, but we're not given revelation how that happens, but it can happen. Okay, we do know that because we see that happen. So what's happening here in
And is this,
Genesis? Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, one second. Is this different than possession? Like demon possession?
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
We'll get and Bella, if you remind me at the very end, I'll explain because right when Jesus crosses over the Galilee into the area of the Gerasene, where we see Legion and there's 7,000 in the great story where he casts them out and they go into the pigs and they go into the
Mm-hmm.
water and die. Bring that back if we forget because that is an important thing because again I don't like the language of angels and demons because that has a connotation to it. I'm going back at a higher level and saying that whatever these beings are, right? They're the certain passages call them the watchers. I like the term watchers because that was their original function in creation was actually to watch over us. Okay, they have free will. We know that because they chose to make imagers of themselves instead of to stay in their primary state, which was to watch over the creation. Okay, they fell. Now, this is why it's important. Let's go now with that just very thin backstory. Let's read. Do you pull up Rachel if you have Genesis 6, 1 through 4, because this is the backstory to what's going on with the flood. Why? So as you're looking that up, the question we should be asking is why was it so bad that God had to destroy and wipe out the entire world? Okay, that's an egregious, huge ordeal, right? That's a huge catastrophe. I mean, we get all bent out of shape over a tsunami or or a hurricane that does all this destruction. We're talking in hundreds of millions of time a fold more aggressive than a tsunami or a hurricane. We're talking about the entire destruction of the entire world, the entire earth. So this is a big deal. So what was so bad that God had to come in and say, enough's enough. I'm starting over, right? This is what's going to happen. So and again, Genesis 6 5 doesn't make sense unless we understand Genesis 6 1 through 4. So read Genesis 6 1 through 4 and see what's going on here.
Okay, 6 1 through 4. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they were born children to them. These were the mighty men of who were of old, the men of renown.
Yeah, what do you think? What do you think's going on there? Is that kind of weird? Is that kind of weird language to have in the middle of Genesis?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so like, is that basically saying that like the Nephilim and like the daughters of God were like having kids together, and then it was like those were like basically like the bad like results of things?
Something's really messed up here, right? I mean, when you read that, you're like, what in the and again, like I said, it's weird. Right? Just let the text speak and you're like scratching your head going, what in the world's going on here? Which is why, sadly, a lot of commentators skip over it. This isn't new. Augustine struggled with this. Um, Calvin struggled with this. What's going on? And it's one of the reasons why we have Jude and Peter towards the back of the New Testament is because these are kind of weird things. Like, is Jude even part? Should it even be canonized? Because it's a direct link to an ancient book that we call First Enoch, right? So what? In fact, Jude quotes from the book of First Enoch, which isn't canonized, right? So you're like, there's something really going on here that's really weird, right? So here's what if you go back and you do the background story of what's going on here, you have what we call a domain violation. All right. So remember, you have the angelic world, the watcher world, you have the human world, and you have the animal world, right? So you have these three levels of ontology, three levels of being: the angel world, the angelic world, the watcher world, the Nephilim world. That world are beings that have free will, but their whole category is just spirit and soul. Soul, remember, is broken down into a triad of mind, will, and emotions. So they have a will that can fall. They have a will that they can do their own thing. So what's happening here? We're being led into a really interesting boundary or a domain violation in that they said, wait a minute, the sons of God, every time in scripture that is used, it is specifically used to the watcher world, to the Elohim world. Again, Elohim can be, God is over 2,000 times referred to as an Elohim, but that is not who God is. That's just a category. He is Yahweh. There's only one Yahweh. There are lots of Elohim, right? There are lots of lesser beings, created beings in that category of the unseen. That's the importance of what Paul's talking about back to Ephesians 6. Okay, but there is only one Yahweh. That's really important for our leaders. There's not multiple Yahwehs. There is one God. That is it. But there are gods, as in these unseen watchers, this unseen world. So what's happening here, the language that we get, the sons of God, that term, the B'nai Elohim, that term, when we see it in the Old Testament, is always refers to this category of watchers, right? This category of what we call angels or demons. So
So angels, sorry, I have a question.
angels
So
and demons are
does that
Elohim.
mean angels and demons? Okay, so they do fall into that
Yes,
classification. Okay, I
yeah,
just wanted
100%.
to make sure
They,
I
they are
was on the
they
same
are
page.
they are watchers, or they are Elohim, right? Small g. In fact, just for fun, go back and read. Pull up Psalm 82. I refer back to it enough that I think we have time just to spend a minute on this
Yeah, I was
before
like,
we.
it might be worth reading it.
Yeah,
Also,
yeah.
it didn't look too long when I looked at it last.
No, it's a short one,
Okay, let me get there.
and it's going to be towards the middle of it. But read Psalm 82. Let's see
Yeah.
what it's kind of a cool.
Okay, Psalm 82. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds
No,
judgment. How
what?
long will you judge?
Why didn't you just read?
Well,
Wait a
yeah,
minute.
that's where it's like, yeah,
Wait,
let me take
What?
it slower. So it says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, lowercase g, he holds judgment.
Yeah, what do you do with that? What's going on? Wait a minute, isn't there only one God? Yes, there's only one God. What does it say there? Both words there are Elohim. So it's saying
Hmm.
God, Elohim, as we call Yahweh, there's only one Yahweh. I cannot emphasize that enough. because this will, and this isn't a besmirchment on other faith structures, but other faith groups like the LDS or one of the other ones would be like Jehovah's Witness. There we get into the problem of there that multiple gods. Okay, and we're not talking about that. That's a very different conversation to have. There is only one God, one Yahweh. What's happening here in Psalm 82? You're seeing that there's the Elohim singular takes his, and that's referring back to Yahweh, takes his presence in the divine council, which is the lowercase g, but it's also the word Elohim. So you're seeing there that there's singular Elohim that refers back to Yahweh, and there's plural Elohim, which refers to the lesser being, the watchers. Okay, were we tracking? So what's
Yeah.
happening here, that then goes back into Genesis 6, 1 through 4. So this B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, B'nai Elohim, right? They can take on flesh. Now, again, we haven't been told how that happens. We know it happens, again, like I said, because we see it in other places in the Old Testament. But what's happening here is that they have a free will that they can violate, and they do. They abandon their primary state. And flip over just I mean, you go to Jude. Just keep that at our ready, Jude, and it's only one chapter, but 6 and 7, you're going to see what's going on there, referring back to this Genesis 6, 1 through 4. So the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, they look down and they go, wow, we want to make little imagers of ourselves. Remember, we as humans are imagers of Yahweh, right? That was our primary creation, was to be his imager. We are made in the image of God. By the way, angels are not, right? The Elohim are not, and the animals are not. We are unique. And I think it's kind of, the angels are like, wait a minute, these guys are lesser than us, and but yet they're special. They're triads, and we're only, dyads. That's not cool. And so there's this
A little
power
jealous,
play,
I see.
right? You see this jealousy stepping in, like, well, wait a minute, we're gonna make imagers of ourselves, and that's what you have going on here. So you have this realm violation, or this stepping down and saying, wait a minute, we're going to make little imagers of ourselves. So notice the language there in Genesis 6, 1 through 4. The B'nai Elohim look down and they see the sons of man to be beautiful. And here's a misnomer. Your translation says, and they took wives. That's not the right
Uh
translation.
huh.
The word there for
Okay.
wives is a generic term in the Hebrew for just women in general. Okay, that's the primary definition. And so the language of wives is not fair to the translation. It should just say they took women, basically. They took female. They looked down
Yeah.
and they
I don't know.
saw
I
they
had a
were.
feeling that my Bible isn't the most like
No, that's
accurate
fine. Hey, and I'm
translation,
not. No, again,
but
I don't. That's neither here nor there. But what's happening there in the Hebrew is the B'nai Elohim. They look down, they see these women, and they go, "Oh my word, we're going to make imagers of ourselves, right?" And so they cross their boundary, they cross their domain, and they take on flesh. And they make imagers of themselves. This is messed up. Read Jude 6 and 7 just to see the language of the New Testament there.
Jude, which one?
6 and 7.
Which verse? Okay.
Uh, 6 and 7.
Um, and the angels who did not stay within their own possession of authority, but left their proper dwelling, has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day.
Yeah. So what do you think's going on there? So they go back up and read 6. They left their primary state. Basically, read that again in your translation.
Yeah. Oh, and then you also wanted me to read 7, right? 6 and 7.
Yeah, 6. I would read both. Yeah, 6 and 7.
Okay, so 6 again. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire.
Okay, so you see what's happening here. Jude uses direct language back to this whatever happened in Genesis 6, 1 through 4. He uses back and says, look, they took on a very they stepped out of their primary created domain, and they took on flesh and they made imagers of themselves. That's what's going on in the whole language of Genesis 6 1 through 4 that sets us up for the flood. Bella, did you have a question or you?
Oh no, I was just I'm drawing a lot of lines between things because I've just been going through Esther and it's
Oh
actually
yeah,
giving similar vibes of like King Artaxerxes and Esther, and I'm just kind of thinking through it all. And it's interesting to me that in verse 7 it compares this behavior to Sodom and Gomorrah, because at first we think like, oh, it's just the fact that these demons or watchers are coming down essentially, and creating little images of themselves. And then we hear, compared to Sodom and Gomorrah, like this is essentially like demons coming down and raping women. It's also
yes,
just like
yes,
it's
yes,
it's God views this as defiled behavior.
yeah.
And so on so many levels was what I'm saying, is that it is it is like so wrong on so many levels.
Exactly. And here's that's very good language on that, because that's actually what's going on. I mean, there's no other way around this, which is
Right.
why
Right.
there's been like Augustine and some other of the patriarchs, or the patriarch, the church kind of fathers. They tried to get around the language of the supernatural, but and they had like the sons of Seth, and you can look at your commentaries and say that the language doesn't work there at all. This is this is weird, unseen realm violation of boundaries that were clearly set when God set up the creation, the watchers, the human, the animal, perfect in the creation. It was all set, and this is why in Genesis 1:31 it looks back and said it's very good, it's all functioning as it should, and then it all just falls apart, right? We have the first rebellion, then we have the second rebellion, and we'll see a third rebellion in Genesis 11. So this second rebellion is weird, all right? And it is one that's going to challenge people to be like, really? You really as a scientist think there is the whole fallen unseen realm out there? And I will answer 100% yes. Because
Well, and then
as
I have a question really quick.
yeah,
I guess I was just thinking about all this, and like, so even with like the first fall, like Satan being like in the serpent, like was he even supposed to be in the garden? Like,
yeah,
since like the angelic realm also could fall and like had their
yeah,
own will, like
yeah.
was he even supposed to be there if he didn't fall as well? You know, like,
Oh,
because obviously Satan is a fallen angel, so like
yeah,
if he hadn't fallen, he wouldn't have even been there. You
yeah.
know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
well,
I feel like it wouldn't
okay.
have even been an issue if like they
Yeah,
stayed where they were supposed to.
and Rachel, this is one of the things that I've never heard anybody even question. It's like, don't you think it'd be if you were out working in the garden? I just watered my garden this morning, and if I was out there and some unseen thing and snake started talking to me, don't you think I would be like on the phone or on this going, hey, you guys, I was in my garden watering this morning, and this cricket came up, started talking to me. It would be weird, right? But you don't get any language that Eve was bothered by that, right? You're just like this. The serpent came and started talking. She's not freaking out that the serpent's talking. She's just like, huh, and she starts having a conversation with this being. You and I would be like, this is
Yeah.
bizarre. There's no language that she was upset by that. So we're seeing there that this was part of the original creation. The Watchers were part of they were not freaked out by the unseen realm, right? They were not. Paul was not freaked
Mm,
out. Jude and Peter and Jesus. Jesus is talking, right? Saying, "Who are you? What's your name?" You know, it goes back to what Bella was saying. Well, we're legion, for we are many. Jesus wasn't disturbed by that. He's talking to the unseen person through the guy that's running around in the tombs, right? He's not bothered by it. You and I should not be bothered by the fact that the unseen realm is a realm of being that's out there. Okay. And we kind of want to
yeah.
dismiss it. And this goes all the way back to, C.S. Lewis screw tape letters. One of the strategies of Satan has been to use science to say you're stupid for thinking that there's this unseen world out there, right? And what I want to do is get back to the reality to say, wait a minute, no, if we don't understand that there is an unseen world out there that had some form of boundary violation to take on flesh and make images of themselves, we're not going to understand why the flood at all. We're just going to be back to the
Mm-hmm.
little preschool narrative that it's a rainbow and a giraffe sticking its head out this little docile boat, and it's all fun and games. It doesn't, and which is why a lot of theologians, right? throw away Genesis 1 through 11 as myth or story, or it's not relevant. It's not definitely not history. And because there is language in there that's hard, it's difficult. It's like, wow, I've got to rethink reality, right? If I'm talking about the unseen and the
Yeah.
seen, there's a reality there. And Bella, back to what you were saying with this whole violation of Eve having this serpent talk to her and this kind of weirdness. Through non-canonical scripture, literature, that we will call the first book of Enoch and the second book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees. There's other documents out there that explain this much better. They're not canonized, so you have to take them that they're not gospel, but they are historical, right? We do know that. They're very good at explaining the background story of Genesis 6 1 through 4. And one of the things is you get two different names going on here. You got Azazel and Shemihaza. And I'll say this: it looks like what's going on, in when we peel this back and start to think what's really going on here. You've got two principal beings. Azazel is his primary name. And by the way, if you read Leviticus 16, you guys will know the whole scapegoat language, right? You probably have heard this before. The scapegoat, right? One goat was to take away the sins of the people. The second goat was set out into the wilderness and to take the sins out with him. That's what we now know through the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the language there is actually that second goat was actually given over to a being called Azazel. Well, here's the link. Azazel is a being that more than likely is the one in Genesis 3 that comes down and says, "Hey, I've got some knowledge that you might want, Eve." And this is kind of weird stuff because you're like, "Wait a minute, what knowledge is he giving to humanity that humanity was supposed to only get from Yahweh?" Right? And you're like, "Well, what did he tell them?" Well, I don't know. Maybe how to make fire. Maybe how to boil a rock and get metal out of it. Maybe how to boil roots and get some organic compounds that give you a high. Right? There is a knowledge. We have this bias that nomads just boiled rocks for 200,000 years and figured out there was copper in it or bronze in it or iron in it, and then they made weaponry. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I think there might be something else going on here. There might be knowledge from this higher set of beings that said, "Hey guys, if you boil these rocks or if you grind up these rocks, you're going to be able to get some. If you boil these roots, you're going to be able to get a high." There's something going on here that is a knowledge, right? You will be like God. You will know right from wrong. You will have this knowledge. So one of the ideas is that this being Azazel gave them knowledge of things that we weren't supposed to have, right? This wasn't knowledge that humanity was supposed to
Mm-hmm.
have. It was like, "Hey guys, check this out. Look at us. We're these really smart beings, and we're really cool because we have knowledge that you don't have," right? And again, we could thread this, and we could spend an entire podcast on talking about that type of knowledge. The second being there, the Shemihaza, is more than likely the one that then said, "Hey, we're going to go down and we're going to make little imagers of ourselves. We're going to take on flesh and we're going to make imagers." So let's get back to that language because I know we got to wrap this one up. What's happening
Yeah.
there? What's
Yeah.
happening? What's happening there is that Genesis 6 language is the unseen world of what we call the Watchers, the Elohim, small G God. They take on they take on human flesh. They procreate with women, and they make this whole class of messed up beings called the Nephilim. Okay, the Nephilim are quasi beings. Now, I'm going to argue that this is where our whole language of demigods actually comes from, with Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Chinese mythology, Roman mythology, American mythology. That mythological language of half god, half human entities like Zeus and Thor and all these types of language is through every single culture has that language. And I believe that's a remnant of what's going on here in Genesis 6 1 through 4.
Okay, sorry everybody. We had another glitch, but we are coming back to it. I'm going to read Genesis 6, 5 through 8, and then we'll have Dr. Anstein kind of conclude like why Genesis 6, 1 through, I guess, 8 leads into the flood. So Genesis 6:5 says, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things, and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord."
Yeah, and read 9. Go ahead and read 9, because that since you read
Oh,
8.
read 9 too.
Yeah.
Okay, so 9 says, "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth."
Okay, so here's the cool thing of what's going on here. When we understand Genesis 6, 1 through 4 of really a boundary violation of the Elohim coming down and taking on strange flesh is the wording from the New Testament. You have this hybrid, whatever they look like, this quasi being, right? Again, demigods. You have this weird, messed up lineage of genealogy between the Elohim and humanity. It's bizarre. It's messed up. It's not the intended order. It is so bad. It is so bad that whatever happened, and we learned this from Peter and Jude, that God actually said, you when you crossed your domain, when you used your free will to take on humanity, human flesh, you are locked up now until the final judgment. You don't get out. You're done. You whatever happened in that rebellion, that second rebellion, the language we get there was so egregious because it messed up God's entire plan for him to have humanity bring his Shekinah to the world around us. So what happens in then 6:5 is we see that all the intention was so evil, was so bad. God said, wait a minute, I've got to start over. And the only way for me to start over is to wipe out the entire earth because it's all corrupted, it's all messed up, except one person. And that's why you see Genesis 6:9 comes in and says, and read that again, Rachel. It's really important. And Noah, there's two things Noah has going for him. One, righteousness, but the other one is his generation. So read that language again in 9. It's really important that we don't miss this.
These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation.
Okay,
So I feel like
so
that's kind of
yeah,
saying, like, within the generation that he was in right now, like with all the people who are like half, like the Nephilim, half
yes,
like, I
all
don't know,
messed
like
up. Yeah.
God slash people. It's like out of all everybody that's on the earth, he's righteous and blameless in
He's,
comparison to
you
them.
got it. And see the duality there. He's righteous and he's blameless, like you just said. It would have been very easy for Moses to just say he was righteous and before God. He doesn't. He adds that line in there, and blameless in his generations. The word blameless, we can't overlook this, in the Hebrew is tamim. And tamim is the exact same word that we see used in Exodus 12:5. What the Passover lamb had to be what? Had to be tamim, had to be spotless, had to be all this word of
Praise.
perfect, complete, whole, without defect. And the language that we get there, even though we don't have the language of DNA in Genesis, you get the idea that Noah had pure human DNA. It had not been corrupted by the Nephilim or the Elohim or this weird boundary violation that's happening in 6:1 through 4. And that's so
Well,
important.
I love that we're making that connection though, because I think I've always read that verse and been like, but like, why did God hate us? Like, and I was kind of like,
Yeah.
why did God like hate his own creation? Like, that just doesn't make sense. But
Yeah.
it's like, it's not that he hated like us, the actual triad human beings. It's that like he hated that the spiritual realm of the Elohim that weren't
Yes.
him decided to cross boundaries and intermix with us, which was not the design.
You
And so
got
it's
it.
like he hated what wasn't his within his design. And like
Yeah.
you see that even like in sexual immorality and like and it's other things
Yes.
too. But that's
Yes.
where I'm like, okay, like it's not that he hated his own creation. He loved us so much that he actually wanted it to be right again.
Perfect. And see, I love that. He loved it so much. He says, okay, the first rebellion, I'm going to kick you out of my garden. The second rebellion, crud, I'm going to wipe it all out and I'm going to start over because I love you. I still want you to be my people, right? And we're going to see in Genesis 11 that we messed that up too. He's like, oh my word, there's the third strike,
Yeah.
right? We still mess that up. And so with the second strike, with the second rebellion, you see this language of what I have a plan, and it's plan A. There's no plan B. Plan A is to have just crush the serpent's head that we saw back in Genesis 3. And he's like, be through Noah and through Ham, right? Through Shem, through Japheth, I am going to bring my seed back through and be Jesus. And then you have to realize which of the three, Ham, Shem, or Japheth, does Jesus come through? That's an important thing. That's for a different podcast, because now you see the language of he is going to bring the world back to perfection and get rid of this boundary violation that happened between the Elohim and humanity. It's all done away with. Now here's where we get into demon language. And Bella, I think you brought this up, that if we want to land the plane here, what's so cool about this is once these quasi beings, whatever they look like, they were big, they were dominant, they were really bad people. I mean, or beings. When they were wiped out, when their bodies, their physical bodies were done away with, guess what wasn't done away with? Their spirit side. And so what
Yeah, I was gonna say they're
happens,
spirits.
this is where we get demons. Demons come from the Nephilim that had their bodies destroyed during the flood, but their watcher part, their spirit part, was still an entity that didn't go away. They roam the earth. And this is the language that you
Oh
get.
dang.
So now you get these demons who are looking for some form of being to take on, which is where you get into possession, which, Bella, was your original one of your questions early on.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Dang, that's crazy.
Isn't that crazy? And so the
Yeah.
third and
Yeah.
the third and the final rebellion, well, just to land this episode, is going to be in Genesis 11, and that's where you get into Tower of Babel. And we can get into this a little bit later. I don't know if you want to, but this is where we get into Deuteronomy 32, 8, 9. You get into what's really going on there. That is the third rebellion, when man said, we are going to make a ziggurat, we're going to make a tower, and we're going to ascend the tower. We're going to come together as one people, and we're going to make ourselves great, right? Humanism, good old humanism. And God looks down and says, holy moly, they did it again. And so this is the final blow. I am going to disperse them. And so if you read Deuteronomy 32, 8, 9, you'll see what's going on there. That's more expressed language from Genesis 11, 1 through about 5. But you get what's going on there is he says, I'm going to separate you out. You 70 nations are going to have Elohim oversee you. I'm done. You guys, good luck with that. You guys get to have a lower God oversee you. I am going to take one person, Abram, and I'm going to breathe my life in him. He's going to become Abraham. And that's going to be the promise, which then comes back to Abraham. You see Jesus coming through Abraham's line through Noah, right? Or excuse me, Noah, Abraham,
Mm-hmm.
Moses with the law to Jesus. You see that beautiful lineage that comes from the restoration. And so Rebellion 1 is Genesis 3 linked to Romans 5. Rebellion 2 is Genesis 6, 1 through 4, linked back to Galatians 3:19. And the final rebellion is Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel fall, where the languages or the language is confused, and that is not restored until we get into the language of Mount Hermon and Caesarea Philippi, when Jesus asked that great question, who do people say that I am? Some say this, that, but who do you say that I am? That language now is the one that resets that violation, and Jesus says, I am reclaiming all 70 nations for myself. And you see the beautiful three falls have all been addressed in the complete totality. But now what we get to do is now we get to jump in to what's going on with the flood once we get to Genesis 6, 10 on, and what in the world happened with the flood.
Man, I'm so excited to
Yeah.
get into the flood.
That was like rapid fire there at the end, but that was so good.
No, yeah, I'm really glad that we had this episode to just kind of lay the foundation of why the flood happened, because yeah, we could get really geeky and get into the science of it and like talk
And we
about the
will,
flood
right?
and have fun
Yeah,
with that,
yeah.
but it's also we will, and we're going to get into that. But it's good to lay the foundation of why it happened, because why else would we talk about it if it wasn't important? And so
Right.
I'm really glad that we just like fleshed all that out.
Totally. And to like sometimes we get the narrative of like God was angry, he was mad at us, but it's like really it was a mercy to us to be
Oh,
able to start
100%.
clean rather than
Yeah.
living with these half demon people, you know.
Yeah, and
Yes.
like understanding the unseen realm better and how he's like handling and like overseeing it all, which is like so
Yes.
interesting, like how he's so sovereign and in
Yeah.
control of everything.
And I feel like
You
it
know,
just goes to show, just like in a Christian living context, like things that seem the most like how could God do this? It's like you don't know what's happening in the spiritual realm. Like maybe this is a mercy God has like blessed you with, and like we can't be quick
yes.
to judge God's motives, but like just trusting that what He's doing is Him being faithful to us. So, anyways,
Yes. Well, and you know, and that love story, you can, and as Rachel said, you can geek out on this. I mean, you can get into the whole Hebrew word of Tishri one, which is Tishri one is was when Adam Tishri one, more than likely Adam and Eve, the garden was fully functional in Tishri one. Noah steps off the ark on Tishri one. Jesus is born on Tishri one. Right? You're like, is this just all coincidental? I mean, it all is so interrelated to what he is trying to do through the love. Remember, all of scripture is a love story, right? From beginning to end, it's a love story. He says, I want you. I want a family. I want to give you a family and I want you to be like me. I'm giving you free will. I'm giving you the gift of free will. I know you're going to mess it up. I know you're going to choose poorly. I have a plan for that. I have a plan for Genesis 3. I have a plan for Genesis 6. I have a plan for Genesis 11. And so you and I get to live out the plan because he is a God of love who wants us to be part of his family. And here we are. All of us come from Noah, right? We all come through that line. Somehow, one of those, Ham, Shem, or Japheth, we come from Noah and his wife. And here we are today as part of that love story. It's just beautiful to me.
Yeah, and I love like seeing all the connections in the New Testament as well. And like just seeing like in Jude and in Galatians and like all these things that are also connecting to the Old Testament. Like it just shows that like it's a complete story and then it's like there's connections to both and that like if it wouldn't be a complete story if we don't see things from both sides. So I like that it all kind of like comes together and
Yes.
that like makes it more like concrete to me.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
well, I was just going to say, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. And for our listeners, kind of exciting because we started the whole Christian and faith talk, or Christian and science, faith, science. I don't know. My words are juggling. Whatever it is, you get it. We started it wanting to go over Hydroplate, and I feel like we're now kind of finally there, setting like a foundation for the creation story and the flood. And so now we'll be moving into more details about the flood, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's so fun. And we've been podcasting for a year. So like I just
Wow.
think that's crazy that like we've been already doing this for a year, like which is
Wow.
insane.
Wow.
But yeah, I'm really excited that even though it's taken some time, we have now gotten to a place where we can go over the hydroplate theory. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening and we will start getting into the hydroplate theory and all things the flood in the next episode.